There we go. Welcome, everyone, to our evening Bible study. We are continuing with our Strange Stories of the Bible studies. This evening, we're doing we're in Acts of the Apostles. If you don't remember, I am Pastor Joey at Redemption Lutheran Church. We're glad to have a little group with us tonight, and for everyone watching at home, glad you could join us digitally. I will be delving into, like I said, the book of Acts. We're going to be in chapter 14, verses 8 through 20. And this is an interesting story in Acts because this is when Paul and his companion Barnabas end up being worshipped as gods. There's a point where the people who are around them think that they're gods, and they have to kind of tamper that excitement. So it's, again, a bit odd. But before we delve into it, like we're doing each week, I'm going to play a video here for you. This is from the Bible Project. Now, we were in Acts once already, so you'll remember some of that from our first week, or second week, when we were in Acts. This is a different video, but dealing with the same time period. But this one will help us really understand how the gods were worshipped during this time, how everyone could kind of pick their own religion and do a grab bag of which gods they liked and that kind of thing, and how the Christian message kind of subverted all that. So it's a good video that will help us understand why the reaction happened that it did in the reading that we're going to read. So if you give me 1 sec, I'll get that video up.
Okay.
Because we don't want it echoing.
During the first century, most people around the Mediterranean Sea lived in densely packed cities, all ruled by the Roman Empire.
Each city was a diverse blend of cultures, ethnicities, and religions.
And because of this, there were all sorts of temples for offering sacrifices to all sorts of gods, and each person had their own portfolio of gods that they gave their allegiance to.
But in every city, you'd also find a minority group who wouldn't worship any gods but their own, the Israelites, also known as the Jews. They claimed that their God was the one true creator and king of the world.
Now, all these cities were connected by a network of roads built by the Roman Empire, and so it was easy to move around, to do business, and even spread new ideas.
Now, one person familiar with these roads was the Apostle Paul. He spent the second half of his life traveling from city to city, announcing that Israel's God had appointed a new king over the nations.
This king wasn't like anyone who'd come before.
Right. Most kings rule with aggression or power, but this new king rules with self-sacrifice and love. His name is Jesus, and Paul is his herald, who's inviting all people to live under this king's rule.
The stories of Paul's travels and how people received this message, that's what the third part of Acts is all about. For some time, Paul's home base had been in the city of Antioch. And from there, he and his co-workers went out on 3 road trips, traveling by land and by sea to strategic cities throughout the empire.
In each city, Paul's custom was to go first to the Jewish synagogue where his people gathered. He'd start teaching and showing how the Messianic king promised in the Hebrew scriptures is Jesus of Nazareth.
And some believed this news, others didn't, and still others thought this message was so misleading and dangerous, they would incite riots to kick Paul out of town.
And so that's when Paul would take to the bustling city marketplace. He would set up shop there to make and sell leather tents to cover his travel expenses. And here, Paul kept sharing the news about the risen King Jesus with anybody who would listen.
He was often misunderstood as just promoting a new god. One time he prayed for a sick person, they were healed, and everyone around thought he must be a Greek god that came down to visit them.
But Paul insisted there's only one true God, and he was his servant. This message often stirred up opposition and more riots, and he got beaten, even thrown in jail.
Why such a strong reaction?
Well, the worship of the gods held together Roman culture. They believed the gods kept their cities safe, and the temple worship of the gods was a huge part of their economy. Paul wasn't just adding Jesus as a new god to the list, he was saying all other gods are powerless, even a sham.
So he's undermining their way of life.
Yes, and more than that. When Paul announced Jesus as a new king, he would call him Lord or Son of God, the very titles people used to refer to the Emperor of Rome.
So Paul's message could easily be heard as a threat against the entire political order. why would anyone join this movement? I mean, it sounds dangerous.
Well, people were captivated by the story of Jesus and how his love created communities where all people were treated as equals, regardless of ethnicity, gender, or economic status. These people formed new families that would eat together. They lived sacrificially and took care of their poor.
They lived like Jesus actually was the king.
Right. And so in every city where Paul announced the message about Jesus, people were being transformed by God's Spirit to become new kinds of humans.
So Paul would stay in that city and teach them the way of Jesus.
And then he would leave for a new city.
This was a difficult life. Paul had to endure a lot of pain and a lot of suffering.
Yeah, and he did so because he believed that his own hardships were a reenactment of Jesus' suffering and death for others. He said it was God's own love that drove him to share the story of Jesus, no matter the cost.
After his third road trip, Paul's reputation had grown. He had made many new friends, but had also made many new enemies that he would be wise to avoid.
But Paul didn't avoid them. His next stop was Jerusalem, a city full of people who wanted him arrested, even dead. And so why he goes to Jerusalem and what happens when he gets there, that's what the final section of Acts is all about.
Okay. Sorry we don't get to watch the final section. You'll have to find it on your own. But if you go into YouTube and type the Bible Project Acts, you'll be able to find all the sections of Acts. I think they're all up now, if you want to watch that. But what did you see in the video? What stuck out to you? Do you have any questions before we delve into the reading?
I don't.
Okay. We're going to start again with Acts chapter 14, verses 8 through 20. Does anyone want to read?
I can start.
Okie doke. There's some names. Just say them with confidence, and no one will know if it's right or
Okay.
wrong because I don't know how to say them. So,
In Lystra, there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that, the man jumped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw that what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, bore up gold and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We too are only human like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past, he let all nations go their own way, and yet he has not led himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy. Even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe.
So not the strangest story we've read, but still odd, and unexpected. Yeah. What strikes you as you first hear it?
Just that the people that Paul was talking to thought God would come down as humans and interface with them.
And that's a very Greek Roman idea. I mean, so
Right.
many of our Greco-Roman myths have these ideas of the gods looking human and walking among them and fathering children or mothering children with humans and all this kind of stuff, Gene. So it's not out of the realm of possibility at all for these people to automatically assume, oh, this is a god in front of us, not just, or at least a messenger or someone empowered by the god. It's an easy jump for them to make, unlike
Right.
today, where we might be a little more questioning of someone going around claiming to be Zeus.
Right.
Anything else strike you as you first hear it?
Just that Paul has to like say to them, that God has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops. Like he has to point out all these things and tell them that you should have joy in your heart. And it's like, it's almost like you got to prove this to them, like otherwise they're not going to believe at all.
Well, and so what Paul is doing here in a lot of ways is reorienting their thought, because they think those things come from their own gods, from Zeus, from whoever else. And so he's trying to reorient and prove to them that no, because I healed this man, because I did this miracle, and I'm a servant of the one true God, that's the one true God that also gives you all these things. And if I can do this, then God also gives you all of these as well. Paul is trying to point them back upwards to God and get the pressure off him, kind of, as supposedly that they call him Hermes. So he's trying to pass that off a bit and say, no, all of this comes from God. I am merely a servant, which is the right thing to do. I often wonder when I hear this story, like, what if Paul and Barnabas just went with it? What if they decided to get worshipped for a while, to be adulated, to take the reins and the oxen, and just live up being it's tempting. Sure, it's tempting, to have people suddenly praising you. I'd like to think I'm a good enough person to turn that away, but it's a tantalizing notion.
Yes.
Some of the questions that this curriculum was made by Pastor Dan Eisenberg over at St. John's that we're following, so he's come up with some of these questions as well. I have to give credit where credit's due. But the one thing that does stick out when you listen to it, right at the beginning of the story, when Paul, it's verse 9, he listened to Paul, and as he was speaking, and Paul looking at the man who was paralyzed intently, and seeing that he had faith to be healed. It's a strange phrase, that he had faith to be healed. Where have we encountered kind of faith and healing before? Do you have any reference points for that? Or do you remember anything about that? Or what do you think of that phrase?
Jesus said to the woman, your faith has healed you, or something.
Your faith has made you well, yes.
Yes.
We're getting one of those passages this Sunday. This Sunday is the Canaanite woman who's begging on behalf of her daughter, and Jesus is rather brusque and mean with her, and she says, but even the dogs eat from the master's table, and he goes, go, your faith has made your faith has done this, your faith. And same with the woman who touches his robe, and power goes out from him, and he goes, who did this? And your faith has made you well. So what does that equation do? Or what is that setting up? Not a trick question.
I think it helps to restore your faith that that these words are true, and it just helps restore your faith in God, and that this is His true word.
And yes, it's essentially faith makes you well.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simply that in both the Gospels and here in Acts. Especially in Luke, we see this equation of if you have faith, then you can move mountains. If you have faith, you can be well. If you have faith, all these things will come to you in some ways. And it can seem very transactional, almost in some ways. But we have to understand what the author of Luke and Acts is trying to do here is to show that anyone can have faith. Even though the Canaanite woman is Matthew, but even this Sunday with the Canaanite woman, she is not one that should have been included in this healing and this faith. She is separated from the Jewish people, yet her faith in Christ makes her well. So too, as Paul's going out here, we don't have we don't know exactly if this person was Jewish or not. Maybe not, maybe so. But it's his faith that makes him well. And the Acts is dealing with the whole idea of welcoming more than just the Jewish community into the Christian faith, but other communities and other beliefs and other as well can be part of this God movement. So anyone can have faith, and that's what this is opening up. We do stumble with that, though, today, because there are plenty of people we know who have faith who are not made well. And we do have to wrestle with that a bit of why, and that kind of goes into the next question that we have. What do you make of miracles? And have you ever experienced one, personally or observing?
Yes.
If you'd like to share, you can, but I'm not going to press anyone. Because sometimes
I
it's
think with Pastor Mary Kanapa,
yeah.
She had supposedly had a tumor behind her one eye. She was losing sight.
Yeah.
And the day of the surgery, the doctors looked in and it was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it disappeared. It's very strange. Here we were all in church praying for her, and here she comes walking in. What a relief that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I experienced several miracles, not to myself that I'm aware of, but to other people. Alice, for one, when she was a little girl, I think it was a scarlet fever or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. On a deathbed, and Jesus came to her. So here she is today.
My mother always talked about it to me and said, they had given me like my last rites, and
Oh, wow.
I was really, really ill. And then I just told my mother, I see Jesus. And after that, the priest was like, well, she's going to be okay. And he also said to my mother that she's going to be a very special girl. It's just that she's always going to have faith. So.
That's pretty miraculous to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's
there's just been many things through my life that I do believe in miracles. There was one time where we lived in Massachusetts, and it was very icy that day. Mm. And people would think I'm crazy. Oh yeah, this is what happens to you. Yeah, sure. But I skidded on ice, and that quickly, I felt like my body pulled out of the car, and I looked down, and I could see my car spinning and getting ready to go in the reservoir. And that quickly, I went from looking to having my hands on the wheel and just going in the right direction.
Yeah.
And when I reached my destination, all I could do was cry, and I called up, Jack, and I said, "You cannot believe what just happened to me." And it was just, I just feel like angels or something. Someone was with me, because it's something I always remembered, and there's just been a lot of things in my life that God has just helped me to get through.
And that's
I mean, when I had cancer and, you know, I had some really, really rough times, and I could feel that people prayed for me, and I just really had a lot of faith and was able to, get through and, help others and talk about it.
and it's a huge blessing when we receive those
Exactly.
Mhm.
But we have to remember, even with this story, there are plenty of people who have faith who Paul doesn't show up to heal. There are plenty of people that have faith
Right.
Jesus never got to. And there's not, it's hard not to see the unfairness in that. And there's not a good answer for that.
Right.
Or at least I don't have one yet, but I'm
Mm.
only 29 and still plumbing the depths of the mysteries of the world. So maybe someday I'll be able to meditate on something, or one of us will come up with it. But for now, I just leave it up to the difficulties of the life we're in, and the fact that we aren't in a perfect world, and we are in a broken world. And in a broken world, no matter how miraculous, bad things will happen. But when
Pastor,
we do,
have you ever read when when bad things happen to good people?
I've read a few chapters of it in seminary. We had to read some of it, but I haven't read the whole thing.
It's so good, and it gives you a little bit of a different perspective, but it's like very rewarding to think about that we have this free will, and it's what we make of our life and how we believe that helps to get us through, no matter what faith you are.
But don't you think that sometimes when you're struggling with something, and say the person doesn't get totally healed, they still have to struggle with whatever it is, but they keep their faith, which ends up inspiring someone else, which in itself is another miracle.
Yes, it is.
It gets handed on. There's an amazing capacity in faith for good and for miracles, and it's always amazing to see. I'm going to steer us in a little bit of a different direction, though, as we keep going through this, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
As we look at now, when they do the healing, and everyone starts worshiping them as gods, and everyone's saying, look how great they are, they must be Zeus, they must be Hermes, and that's a real compliment, because Zeus, we remember, is the king of the gods. Zeus is the head honcho here, and Hermes is his messenger. So, these are highfalutin gods, not just your run-of-the-mill gods. Do we think this happens today at all? Do we turn people into gods? Do we worship anyone? Do we have that propensity to kind of, someone does something good and suddenly we turn them into a deity? Can you think of any examples in a modern day where this could happen?
I know a lot of people worship Trump. A lot of people worship movie stars. All kinds of people. No matter if they're singers or whatever, actors.
I mean, it's a bit of a dark example, but I tend to think of someone like the Subway guy. The Subway guy who lost all the weight eating the sandwiches, and he became this star.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, he was a rather messed up individual who did some very terrible things. But because he did that one good thing, we threw him up on a pedestal without much second glance. And even because we threw him up on that pedestal, other people enabled him to keep doing bad things. We as a culture can do that, where someone does one good thing, I mean, they suddenly are up there, and God forbid they fall. We almost are invested in keeping them up there because, well, if they can do it, maybe we can too. Or we just need to have that kind of as a reinforcement for our own lives. It's very easy to want to deify people sometimes. And just like it was back then, it's just we don't have Zeus and Hermes anymore. We've got movie stars, politicians, Subway.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think it can be easy to lean into those things and forget that these are human people and they're flawed and difficult, and they're going to mess up as much as they're going to get it right. Some even just mess up all the time, but do you think there's any other modern gods that you can think of that we should throw out there?
I think the sports figures.
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly some of the sports figures.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly think in the world of banking and Wall Street and in some of the people who supposedly have these magic trades and all that kind of stuff, do you know what I mean? That we certainly deify them. Anyone with money, really, we decide, well, you must be Jeff Bezos, he must know something, or he must be a gift from God if he can make all that money.
Right.
Questioning how he makes it. There's certainly some deification there. Where do you see evidence of God when you're looking in the world? I mean, if we're saying that we see, or if we all want to deify people, and that's probably not the way to go, where should we be looking for God? Or where do we see
I
God?
think in the small things like the butterflies and the birds and
All nature.
yes, and just like the other day with that hurricane, I had a burial through that, but yet when we got to the cemetery, everything cleared up, the sky was blue, and the big clouds came up, and it was beautiful. But you know, and I could see God through all of it, and I think we tend to not always find him in the small little things that are there.
We tend to overlook, well, they're not grand, so sometimes we overlook it or we miss it. Anyone else?
I guess
I think in just sometimes everyday people.
I would look at my granddaughters. You know how long we prayed for my daughter to be able to adopt, and it was said a while back. It's like ask God for much, but expect more. And lo and behold, we prayed for years. And she got more. She got twins. Adopt get twin girls. So, you know, I definitely look at all of that as a miracle, especially because my son-in-law has stage 4 Ewing sarcoma when he was only 15 years old, which was the reason why they couldn't have children, and yet, with all the prayers that were going on for him at the time, I mean, everybody says he was a miracle, and he lived through it, and he's still doing well.
That's so true.
What do we make of the rather violent end of the story, Paul's stoning? How does that strike you?
Extreme.
Somebody in the beginning of the story, wasn't he part of stoning Stephen?
Well, that was further in. Yes, that was before he was converted. Yeah. So there's definitely a parallel there.
It started out that way with him stoning someone to him being stoned.
Yep. Good catch.
Yep.
One thing I found interesting is I think I told you about last time when we are in the Acts, I always use this this commentary, Sacra Pagina by Luke Timothy Johnson. But he does his own, so like your Bible has it broken up into paragraphs and sections and headers. None of that exists in the original transcripts. It's just one run-on story. Those are all inserted by editors and translators later. So they can shape, though, how you look at the story. And Luke Timothy Johnson does an interesting thing because he ends this story at verse 18, before the stoning. And he thinks the stoning and what happens after should actually be part of the second section that has to do with them traveling, because he thinks there would have been a little bit of time between the two things. You know, it wouldn't have been an immediate sudden stoning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he also thinks the way that the author of Luke writes, that would have been its own travel section. And why are they traveling? Because of the stoning and all this. So he breaks it up a little more than what I think most of my translation keeps it with that section. I think most people's do. But it is interesting to see the crowd be so fickle to be so praising to start. But also, at the same time, is it that surprising? I mean, how often have we turned on people? Think about it.
Sure.
How often have we loved someone one minute, the next minute they're the enemy of whatever for doing whatever wrong? You know what I mean? It's the mob can be a difficult thing.
It's called humanity.
Yeah. So the last question I've got for y'all is, why do you think they even included this story? When we're dealing with all the stories in Acts, because Acts goes on for quite a while and there's lots of traveling that happens, why do you think this stop was important that the author had to put it in? Why do you think it needed to be heard? Again, it's still odd. It's strange. There's no right answer here.
I was just thinking that his faith was so strong that, like you said, wouldn't it be nice for people to think you're so grand? And yet he turned around and took his faith and stood up on his faith and said, "No, I am not God."
Exactly.
What I'm able to do comes from God, but I'm not God.
I think that's definitely a big part of it. It's a great example of how we are to live our Christian life, and understanding that even the great things we do with our faith and the great things our churches do and all that, it is God who does it. We are part of that, and we get to be part of that. But it's not just our work. It's not just us being promoted, and we're doing it in service to our Maker. Any other reasons you think it's included?
I think it's just like your everyday lessons in life. You struggle with them, and here he is, telling them all about God, and it helps just like to help you with your everyday life. And I just think it's another lesson to be learned.
I think one of the main reasons it was included too was it is directly confronting some of the outside religions.
Okay, yeah.
Story that, I mean, there's no one reason why it's included, but I think one of the reasons is it's dealing with the Greek and Roman, kind of the Greco-Roman gods, in a way that we don't always see them directly mentioned, especially in Acts. Usually we're talking more about Jews versus Gentiles. Can Gentiles become Christian? And that kind of internal conflict within the beginnings of the church. And this brings it to a whole nother level, kind of outside, kind of with that image that we saw in the video of the cross, kind of breaking down all those other gods, doing what is this doing to the culture around, what's it doing to the people who don't believe, and how is this message affecting them? I think this story is included as a way to kind of help those people connect with the story in a different way too, than they would without it.
The areas that he seems to be going right there, instead of being, in Jerusalem and Israel, but the areas that he's going here seems to be more of the conversions to Christianity.
Oh yes, yeah, he's almost exclusively outside of Jerusalem. He goes back every now and then, but
and I guess if you really wanted to think, well, Jesus was a Jew, and that the Jewish people would have been the ones that turned around and totally accepted. And it seemed that it was really more of the people that were outside of that area that started to become part of the Christian faith.
It was a strange combination. If we did a whole study on Acts, we could really get, because even beyond Acts, it is one of the huge controversies that makes up the beginning of our church, is how the church would welcome non-Jewish people into this faith that started in Judaism, is rooted in Judaism, but is not Judaism.
Right.
You know what I mean? That Jesus was Jewish, but Christianity is a separate thing from that. But at the same time, we draw our roots to the same place. And how the Jewish community had to reconcile with, the Jewish community that became Christian, the early Christian community of those who were Jewish, how they thought, do these people have to become Jewish first to become Christian? Do they have to follow this pattern? All these questions are building up in a way that they had to deal with. And then you've got someone like Paul going around who firmly believes that you don't have to become Jewish to become Christian. You can jump straight into Christ. You can be baptized and go for it. Creating trouble. He's the one poking the bear by going to all these places, like you said, that always have these communities. But you also notice in the video we watched, Paul first went to the Jewish community. Every town he went to, He first went there, tried to preach the word there, and then he would go further out. He did always start with people who were at least familiar with the traditions more and the customs more and the stories more. And that's also modeling a bit of Jesus. And if you come to my sermon this Sunday, we will get into the idea of, was Jesus there only for the Jewish people? Was Jesus there for everyone? And what did that mean? And why was that mission even there? And the ideas of the Messiah. But that's for a whole nother sermon, which I've already written, so I don't want to give it to you now. It's a long one too. We're going long this Sunday because it's supposed to be nice out. So even outdoors, people can sit through a full sermon this week, not just my half sermons I've been given. So we got a full 2 pages this week of sermon. But we'll get into that this week. But there was the idea that the Messiah should first come to the Jewish people. The Jewish people would get their act together, and then others would be welcomed in. And our reading this Sunday kind of challenges that. And so too with Paul. I think he's following that model in some ways of starting with the Jewish people in each town. But he doesn't stay there. He does welcome everyone else in.
Do you think that part of the reason why he went there because he felt the most comfortable there?
I was going to say that.
Partly, yes, I imagine. And partly even, we have to remember his history of, he was hugely involved with the Jewish community as a Pharisee before he converted. Jane, he was the one holding the rules, doing the rituals. I mean, he knows the Jewish community.
Yeah, because we tend to go where we feel comfort first.
Yeah.
And then if we're not getting it, then we go find someplace else.
Definitely could be part of it. So
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing else for you tonight. We went longer than we usually do. That's nice. Next week, we have 2 weeks left. Next week, we're going to be dealing with Jeremiah's underwear. So that is in the book of Jeremiah. If you want to read ahead, it is chapter 13, verses 1 through 11. So if you do want to come back next week, it's the same link and everything. You'll be able to get into us. But it's Jeremiah 13, 1 to 11. And we'll be delving into that. I honestly don't remember this story, so I'm going to have to refresh myself this week. But we will delve into that and have a good time. But I thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ginny, for coming all the way from St. Tim's. We appreciate it. I'm glad you heard about us. And if you want to come back next week, no, you're welcome.
I would love to.
We'll be here. And we'll see you all next week or this Sunday or whenever.
Okay.
Everybody take
Thank
care.
you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye, Jenny.
Good night.
Bye, Jack.
Bye.
See you later.